Hello, my name is Roy Canterbury. I'll be your host today on Archery Talk 101. What we're going to be learning today is what to do if you get a dry fire on your bow and what you need to check for. Uh, First, I'll describe what is a dry fire. Well, when you shoot your bow without having an arrow knocked on a string, that is your dry fire. With some things, a dry fire is okay. Take a firearm. You can fire it without a round being loaded. Uh, Sometimes, quite a few times with little or no effect. But when you dry fire a bow, things can go wrong really quick. Just making, from just making a loud noise to the bow coming apart in multiple pieces. Now, those pieces can cause not just damage to the bow, but to someone else near you. It could just end up being a red mark, or even serious injury or even death, depending on what comes apart and how it comes apart. Uh, Now the latter, the death is really rare occasion. Normally you'll get minor scrapes as you have pieces come off of it. Like your peat might come flying or knock point. Um, Now here's a little bit on how you can check for the breaks and damage to your bows. Now a break is obvious what's going to happen on a break. You're going to see a damage. Something's going to be broke. Your limbs or something like that is going to be broke. Now you don't really need to check for that because that's definitely hidden. What you need to check for is some of your hidden damage. Now here's some of the checks that you can go through for checking the limbs. First, you want to do a visual inspection, see if you can see anything obvious. It could be a crack or a split or something come apart. Look for that. And if you're not seeing anything there, then take a cotton ball and rub it up and down the limbs. The cotton will catch on any little fragments of the limb that might be sticking out, whether it be a fiberglass limb or a wood limb. Then if you don't see anything, then you can rub your fingers up and down. Just remember, don't do that first, because if there is a splinter on there, you can end up shoving it in your finger, and that doesn't feel good. So make sure you do that cotton ball first. Then your fingers can feel lots of things that you may not be able to see. So go ahead and rub your fingers up and down. Make sure that there is nothing on there that could be causing a problem. Now, once you've done that, then you want to take either denatured alcohol or rubbing alcohol, wipe on the limbs. Sometimes that'll show up a little crack that you can't really see, and then they'll pick it up. Uh, After you've done that, everything seems okay. Now then there's the next step to go into, and this can be the most dangerous part of the check because you're actually going to draw the bow. So what you're going to do, use your fingers, slowly draw the bow back, only partially back though. Now you're listening for any sounds like something cracking or any noises that are not normal. If you hear a sound of it cracking, then there's an internal crack starting to go, and you want to stop the test at that point. And at that point, you're going to need to replace the limbs. If it's on a long bow or recurve, the limbs aren't replaceable, then the whole bow is shot. Otherwise, if you can replace the limbs, that can be done, and those are always done in pairs. Now, once you've done that, now it's time to actually do a full draw on it. So you want to make sure you put an arrow in it because you don't want to dry fire it. Now, if the bow is normally shot with fingers, go ahead and draw it and shoot it with fingers. If the bow is designed to normally be shot with a release, then you'll want to shoot it that way. Get your arrow knocked on there, draw it back the full draw. Listen for noises. If you hear any cracking or anything going on, any weird sounds, then you want to go ahead and let down. If you're not hearing anything, then you can go ahead and shoot the bow and see what happens. And that's why I say this is the point. If there's an internal damage, it could break at that time. Normally, you're going to see a damage if it shows up. So now you've completed those testing, and it appears to be a bow is okay. Now you go ahead and continue shooting the bow. But over the next few times shooting, and there for a while, you want to make sure you check for sounds as you draw the bow, or if it starts shooting differently than it used to be. So like you're drawn back, and all of a sudden your arrows are starting to go not even close to where you're aiming, and then it seems like it's getting worse, and you keep adjusting your sights. Something is getting ready to go, so you want to at that point probably retire the bow or figure out what's wrong with it. So here are some of the cases that you might run into as why it got dry fired. One, you forgot to knock the arrow in correctly. That has been done. I've actually watched a video one time of a guy shooting his bow, and he forgot to put the arrow on. It can happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but you just got to pay attention. The next thing is if your arrow is not fully seated onto the string. Most of your compound bows and recurves, the nocks are designed to have an actual little physical snap on there. And then if you don't get it on the way, it can fall off, and then you'd have your dry fire. The next case could be that your arrow falls off the rest and is off to the side. You don't notice it. And when you shoot, there's really no force against the string, so it's like a dry fire. So you want to make sure it's on there. Then you have the other point where it can fall off is when you take and either have your fingers below, or you hook your release below your nock point and draw it back. That string goes at an angle through the nock, and that can cause it to snap off as well. So you have that trouble mostly with your short draw length bows. As they get shorter and shorter, that string angle can be larger and larger, and all of a sudden it can snap off, and no fault to yours other than the fact that it does come off. And let's see, in crossbows, now that's one other thing. You might have a little bit different because you need to make sure you're using the right nock for that. But there's a couple things. When I get into the crossbow section, I'll describe some of the causes of that. So now let's take about each of the different types of bows. You're going to have your recurve bow, your long bow. That one type generally has a little bit less power stored in the limbs, but it's still prone to damage. What can happen when you dry fire? The limb tips could break because that's where a lot of your force is on the string. It's going to be right in there. Your limbs could also crack or break, and you'll check those the way I described earlier. With the visual and the cotton ball and fingers. So let's talk about the most common places to check on your crossbow. What you're going to have is they have a lot more power in the limbs. So generally, if you dry fire a crossbow, you're not going to have to worry about checking for damage because you will have broken limbs. Your strings, your cables will break, your axles and your cams will break. Basically, you have to replace the whole head on a crossbow if that does happen to you. So you want to make sure that you try to avoid that in all cases, because it's generally a catastrophic failure just from the power that's in them. Now, for some reason, you do get a dry fire, and because the bolt retaining clip is either broken or not holding the bolt, that can cause your bolt to not be seated correctly, and that could cause your dry fire. Another reason could be using the wrong nock on the bolt. They each have their own different styles. You have your flat nocks or your half moon nocks, and they are not interchangeable. And if you use the wrong one, that can cause a dry fire as well, and as well as not sitting them all the way back against the string. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the one that's going to have the most variations in what can go wrong, and that's your compound bows. Some have been known to not take any damage at all, and there are some out there that say they'll stand up to dry fire. They're normally on your real expensive side. There is a few of them that have advertised that, but generally some take some kind of a damage. It's going to be depending on the bow and a few other factors. The faster the bow, the more likely it's going to have damage. There are just some that just don't take it. Like before, if it's broken damage, that's obvious. You're obviously going to see a broken limb or string or something. Now we're going to start with some of the things you can look at that may not be visible. The first one is you could have bent axles. Generally, if you have a bent axle, it's because it's dry fired. Because remember, it's a hardened steel, and the forces in normal shooting does not bend an axle. It has to take some exorbitant force to bend those axles. That's the first thing that can go wrong. And, you need to take it apart and check those to make sure you don't have damage on there. Next, you're going to look at your cams and modules. They can be loose or bent, especially the string comes off the cams. And of course, you want to check the limbs as described above, as I described there before. So the next thing, you want to take a look at the string. There's a good chance anything added to the string like peeps or dampeners that have come off the string. Lots of times the peeps, when you dry fire, the force of that is going to drive that peep off. Or if you have string silencers, it could easily send those flying. So you want to check those and see if there's any problem with those. Then you want to look at your string. Now, assuming it's either on or been put back on, you want to look at your string and make sure you don't have any loose or broken strands. That can happen, especially when that string comes off the cams, because there's sharp edges on the grooves that the string's right in. And if you have any broken strands, replace the string. You don't have too much any options because it's on the way of failing. Likewise, if you have a peep in your string, you want to take a look. If all of a sudden you have one side of it, instead of bending around both sides of the peep equally, one goes straight and the other one bends around, there's a good chance that you have broken strands on that one side, and it also needs to be replaced. So you want to check that, make sure that you don't have anything like that going on, and just check and see, just make sure everything is okay. Now, if you do dry fire it, you want to make sure you take it to a professional to have it inspected. You can look at it, all day long, but sometimes a professional, we can take a look at it and see a problem right away. And if you don't have a bow press, you can't really take it apart and do a complete inspection of the like the axles, because those you have to take off, and you need a bow press to do that. So that's kind of what I have today. It's a short one, not a real long one, but I think it's a real important one. And if you have any questions or anything, you can always join the Archery Talk 101 Facebook group. I'll leave a link in the description of this, and you can always get out there and ask questions. Once again, my name is Roy Canterbury, and I'm your host here on Archery Talk 101.